Hello students, welcome to EPG Patshala. I am Dr. Renu Tyagi from Department of Anthropology, University of Delhi. Today we are discussing the module titled Pastoralism under the paper Ecological Anthropology, Cultural and Biological Dimensions. The learning objectives of the module are: number 1, the course aims to provide an introduction to the pastoralism and general socio-political organization. Number 2, the module also enables the learner to learn about the type of pastoralism and the geography of pastoralism. The study of this module enables the student at postgraduate level to understand the origin of pastoralism and different parameters of pastoralism. Now let us understand the concept of pastoralism. It is a form of agriculture in which its practitioners specialize in and obtain their primary subsistence from the husbandry of one or few domesticated animal species. These species are invariably herbivore, such as cattle, horses, sheep, llamas, alpacas, goats, camel, reindeer and similar animals. Plant cultivation often forms one component of pastoralism but is not generally dominant. In some cases, however, such as reindeer, the species of focus is not domesticated. A precise definition of pastoralism is elusive, with the primary disagreement centering on the proportion of horticulture, agriculture in the economy and degree of mobility. The term nomad has generally been used by anthropologists to refer to mobile pastoralists and should not be applied to hunter-gatherers. A brief history of the study of pastoralists was presented by Dyson Hudson in 1972. Pastoralists and their animals have developed a long-term mutually beneficial relationship. Animals provide humans with products such as meat, milk, hide, dung, wool, labor and services such as companionship and the transportation of people and goods. Humans provide animals with protection from predators, a steady food supply, health care, an expanded habitat and assured reproductive success. Pastoralism requires a great deal of land as a pasture base. It is generally more productive, that is calories per acre, than most hunting and gathering, but less productive than farming. However, pastoralism can be very efficient in areas unsuitable for farming. Pastoralists utilize their animals to convert unusable biomass from one trophic level to usable products in another trophic level. Grasses that humans cannot digest are converted into milk and meat that they can eat, even though using the animals involves an additional trophic step. It is highly efficient in such circumstances because people cannot use the grasses anyway. However, the use of supplemental feed such as the corn that human could directly consume is a very inefficient use of resources and few pastoralists do that. Domesticated animals also serve as efficient storage facilities, food resources stored on the hoof, making them mobile as well. In many cases, they could also be considered examples of social storage, wealth stored in animal owned by individual. Let us understand the general socio-political organization. There really is not a typical pastoral socio-political organization varying from loosely organized tribes to almost state-level societies. The Mongols of Central Asia were loosely organized groups of families and lineages until Genghis Khan united them into an imperial state. After his time, they reverted to their former organization within a few generations. However, many pastoral groups maintain a loose tribe-level socio-political organization, one that preserves the independence of individual herding groups but ensure some overall control of the system of pastures. The household consisting of either a nuclear or extended family is the usual primary unit of social organization, and most are patrilineal. Social units have to be flexible in size and membership to be able to adjust to the shifting size and composition of herds. People tend to marry someone from a nearby family both to maintain animal ownership and to cement the alliances. Most groups maintain at least two major settlement types: village, where most people live, and stock camps, where the herders are tending the animals. The population of pastoral groups can vary greatly from a few thousand to hundreds of thousands, but pastoralists usually have a lower population density than plant cultivators, because pastoralism is often less productive per acre than farming. However, in some areas such as the Central Andes and in Iran and Central Asia, pastoralists supplemented by some agriculture have maintained fairly large and stable population for long period of time. In a pastoral society, most if not all of the population is engaged in animal husbandry. Most groups have a fairly strict sexual division of labor, with the men generally tending the animal, often at stock camps. The women are often left in the village to maintain the household and tend the lower status animals. Now let us understand the types of pastoralism. Here we define three basic types of pastoralism in table 1, where animal forms the basis of the economy. These types form a continuum from what many consider to be real pastoralists, those who are highly mobile and completely reliant on their animals, to sedentary or village pastoralists, those who are settled and where agriculture forms an important aspect of the economy. Individual groups will alter their adaptation depending on condition, and so the categories must remain flexible. Table 1 illustrates the basic type of pastoralism. Now let us see nomadic pastoralism. The first type is nomadic pastoralism, where animal and their products form virtually the only resource. Some gathering of wild plant resource would be conducted, but no agriculture would be practiced. Such societies would consist of small, highly mobile groups that follow their livestock across the landscape. Nomadic pastoralists are uncommon, but the Sami or Lapps reindeer herders of the far northern Scandinavia are a good example. Now let us see semi-nomadic pastoralism. Semi-nomadic pastoralism is the second major type of pastoralism. Semi-nomadic groups have a seasonal round and animals are moved from pastures to pasture, a pattern called the seasonal transhumane. In some groups, the entire population, human and animal, will move to new pasture, meaning that the new pasture must be of sufficient size and quality to support all of the people and animal. In other groups, just the men will move the animal while the women stay in a permanent village tending the gardens. In this system, animals are by far the most important resource, but some horticulture may be practiced to supplement the animal products. Trade of animal product to other groups would also be common. This is the most common form of pastoralism. Now let us see what is semi-sedentary pastoralism. The third major type is semi-sedentary pastoralism, sometimes called the agro-pastoralism. In this type, the animals are still the main resource, but horticulture forms a major aspect of the economy. Many of the people in such a group would live in a permanent village and grow crops. The animals would have to be moved around from pasture to pasture, but a relatively small number of specialized herdsmen would do that work. An example of this type of pastoralism is the Navajo of American Southwest. Two other types of pastoralism have been defined, but These are really pastoral component of the agricultural system. Now let's understand the herdsman husbandry. In herdsman husbandry, animals are important, but agriculture is the predominant economic activity, and the majority of the population are sedentary farmers. The animal herds are tended by herdsmen in pastures distant from the main community. Example of this type of pastoralism are the Basque in France and Spain. Another category is sedentary animal husbandry. This is also a pastoral technique that forms a component of an agricultural system. This form is more accurately described as agriculture with some stock raising, because it consists of full-time farmers who also raise some animals. A small scale example is the Dani. The dairy industry in the United States is a good example of a large scale practice. Now let's understand the geography of pastoralism. Until recently, pastoralists occupied a large portion of the old world, extended from East Africa east to China and north to Siberia. Spooner defined 5 broad ecological zones occupied by pastoralists in Old World, characterized by the primary type of animal raised. Pastoralists relying primarily on single species of animals occupying 4 broad regions of the Old World, which can be seen in figure 1. Figure 1 depicts in general geographical distribution of pastoralists in Old World by broad ecological zones. The geographical distribution of the pastoralist can be categorized as number 1, northern Eurasia, where reindeers are the primary stock. Number 2, the eastern Mediterranean region, where sheep are the major animal. Number 3, portions of North Africa and Arabian Peninsula, where camels are the primary stock. And number 4, sub-Saharan Africa, where cattle are the main stock. The 5th general region where pastoralists work multiple stock, including horses, occupy the broad arid region extending from North Africa east across the Southwest Asia and to Mongolia. There are only a few native pastoral groups in the New World. The Navajo herd sheep and some cattle in the American Southwest. A number of groups herd llamas and alpacas in the mountains of South America. Other local pastoral economy in the South America include the Gaucho economy of Argentina and neighboring countries, and the Gojira of the Gojira Peninsula, that is the Venezuela-Colombian border. The Gaucho way of life developed as cattle ranchers moved out into the Pampas, the vast dry plains of Argentina. Gauchos were originally cowboys of mixed Spanish Native American ancestry who developed a unique way of life following the herds of cattle across the unfenced ranges. The Gojira are a native South American people who adopted herding soon after contact. They raise cattle, horse and small stock in their arid and isolated peninsula. Until recently, they maintained a strikingly distinctive way of life, but as elsewhere, the old ways are now changing fast. The areas occupied by pastoralists are shrinking all over the world due to constant and increasing pressure for them to adopt more sedentary lifestyle. This is partly due to the loss of pasture to expanding agriculturists and to a desire by government to exercise control of the pastoral population within their borders. National government now seek to regulate and help pastoralists by forcing them to settle in villages and adopt agriculture. A discussion of pastoral sedentarization process is presented in Salzman. The origin of pastoralism can be understood with the fact that it is generally believed that pastoralism evolved from an agricultural base. Perhaps some early farmers decided to specialize in animals either by choice or because there were too many people for too small a grain harvest. Perhaps the first pastoralists were outcast from agricultural communities, forced for some reason to live with the animals on the fringes of the town. Whatever the specific reason, it seems that early pastoralists were probably people who left farming and began moving their animals around the landscape to take advantage of areas not used by the farmers. It is probable that pastoralism emerged as a standard way of life soon after the domestication of sheep and goats. Let's see some parameters of pastoralism. Pastoralism is a complex endeavor that requires a great deal of knowledge about both animals and the environment, including the availability of water and pasture and the presence of competing groups. The important considerations include pastures, type of animals, herd composition and size, movement of herd and product. The primary land resource for pastoralists is the pasture, a general area where animals can find the food they need. Thus, like farmers, pastoralists are usually tied to specific plots of land. Many people equate a pasture with a grass covered area where animals such as cattle or horses graze. However, a pasture is just a place where food for a particular animal is present. Pastoral animals occupy two general dietary niches, grazing and browsing. Grazers primarily eat grasses and low-growing plant, while the browsers primarily eat the foliage from bushes and trees. If the animals are browsers, a good pasture would consist of bushes and trees, not grasses. Nevertheless, the term grazing is commonly used to refer to feeding behavior of both grazing and browsing domesticated animals. In all cases, pasture must be properly managed to prevent overgrazing. The primary issue is the carrying capacity of the pasture. The determination of the carrying capacity is based on the water availability, pasture type and quality, and the type of animals to be herded, all of which can vary by season. One must be careful not to put too many animals or the wrong animals in a pasture or keep them there too long. As many pastoral groups move their entire livestock population to new pasture, they must ensure that the pasture is capable of supporting all of the animals. In a sense, then, the herder must monitor the nature and condition of the pasture and note the succession stages of the various plant species in them to know when to have animals on them and how long the animals can be there. Another consideration is the slope of the pasture, as the herders do not want to excessively tire their animals on steep sloped pastures. If pastures are owned or controlled by individuals, the decision making process would rest with that person. If, however, pastures are community owned, some sort of centralized control would be needed. Among the pastoralists of Persia, now Iran, Barth showed that while individual households owned and controlled their own herds, the tribal chief generally regulated the assignment of these herds to pastures. This served to prevent over exploitation of the pasture by any one segment, as overgrazing could endanger the pasture system of the entire group. In addition to the regulation of grazing pastures, assignment also functioned to control animal population, which in turn helped to control human population by limiting the food supply. However, pastures are sometimes poorly managed. If an individual limits herd size for the good of the community so as to not over-exploit a pasture, he depends on the owner of the other herds to do the same. If everyone does not cooperate, there is little incentive for individuals to limit their herds, and short-term gain is put ahead of long-term stability, which is not a good situation. In such cases, the total population of the livestock may crash in response to the overgrazing, drought, disease or other condition that change the carrying capacity of the available pastures. The animal population will fall below the carrying capacity of the pastures and the human population will follow suit. As the pastures recover, both the animal and human population will grow until the next crash and a boom and bust cycle will result. The recent drought in eastern Africa that so severely affected the Maasai is a good example of this phenomena. Now let us see the types of animal. Ecological conditions influence the type of animal that can be raised in certain areas. The availability of proper pastures, water and accessibility to land limit both animals and their herders. The choice of which animals to herd is also greatly influenced by the tradition. Some domesticated animals such as pigs, chicken and dogs are not herded in a pastoral manner and are not considered as pastoral species. Let us see the grazers. Cattle are primarily grazers and require fairly good pastures and a great deal of water to do well. Cattle eat the blades of the grass and leaves the root in the ground, allowing the grass to rapidly regrow and be eaten again. However, cattle will also do some browsing and eat the leaves of the trees and bushes. Domestic cattle require considerable human labor, particularly in areas with snow, because cow will not dig through even shallow snow to the grass below and have to be fed. Well-fed cattle will produce milk, a major product in quantity. Yaks are related to cattle, both are bovids and behave in a similar manner, except that yak live at very high altitude in Central Asia and will paw through snow. Let us see horses. Horses have the same basic habits and need as the cattle, but generally require less human labor than cattle. Horses do less browsing than cattle and so have a greater impact on the grasses. Cattle and horses can share the pastures as long as the total number of animals does not exceed the overall carrying capacity of the pasture. Like cattle, horses can be used for meat, skin and milk, but are more highly valued for transportation. However, horses and cattle cannot always be in the same pasture. In the Yucatan Peninsula, the Spanish had a very difficult time grazing their horses as there was little suitable grass. However, they eventually found that horses would eat the leaves of the ramen plant. Ramen being Spanish for the horse fodder, cattle in the same region would eat the vexim plant, but horses would not, as vexim contains a chemical that makes the hair of the horses fall out. The cattle can eat it as their four-chambered stomach can detoxify the chemical. Sheep are also grazers and will eat many types of vegetation. However, when sheep eat grass, they will often pull up and eat the roots, killing the plants and leaving the land bare. Thus, rather than just quickly regrowing, the entire grass plant is removed and new plant must colonize the pasture. This process takes time and so pasture recovery is more difficult. Thus, sheep are more likely to overgraze and do not share pasture with other grazing animals, well having an overlapping niche and habitat. This is one of the problems that led to the enmity between cattle herders and the sheep herders in the Old West and remains a problem in the United States today. Llamas and alpacas are the two species of domesticated camelids herded in the mountains of South America. Both animals are grazer, but the llamas is more tolerant of differing habitat and is widely used as a pack animal and for the meat. Alpacas need to remain above 3000 feet of elevation and are valued more for their fine wool than their meat. Let's come to the browsers. Goat can both graze and browse, making that species very versatile and adaptable to most pasture types and able to take the advantage of ecotone pastures. In that sense, goats are excellent secondary animals that can complement any herd. Goats produce milk that can be made into cheese. Goats eating almost all vegetation tend to seriously overgraze pastures and must be carefully managed. The camel are also the browsers. The one-humped camel is native to the Middle East and Africa, while the two-humped camel is native to Central Asia. Camel can get along well on poor pasture and with relatively little water. Both water and fat are stored in the humps, and camel can survive in severe conditions for long periods of time. Camel are used for meat, skin and milk, but the milk has too little fat to be churned into butter. Like horses, camel are also most valued for the transportation. Reindeers also browse on the short vegetation of the tundra, primarily lichens. A number of groups in the far north of the Old World herd reindeer, while the herders own the animal and view them as being domesticated, at least in the broad sense of the term. Most reindeers are not controlled genetically but are essentially tamed wild animals that are still more or less hunted by people. Small herds of tame animals are kept for milk, meat and used as decoys when hunting other reindeer. Pastures for reindeer is available all year and the animals move around the landscape on their own to take advantage of better areas. Some group of reindeer herders, such as the Chukchis of the eastern Siberia, basically track and intercept wild reindeer as they migrate to new pastures rather than purposely move them into the new pastures. The distinction between hunter-gatherers and pastoralists is very fuzzy with reindeer herders. Reindeers are actually wild animals and are rarely hunted. However, the economic focus of the herders is so specific to the reindeer that they function much like pastoralists do. Herd composition and size also matter. A herd is not simply an aggregation of available animals, and a number of things must be considered in deciding on its composition and size. The type or types of animal herded is dependent on several factors. Initially, the natural environment has to be considered because not all animals can successfully inhabit all ecozones. Even if a species is suited to the ecozones, the economic expediency and the effectiveness of the herding them in specific ecological conditions has to be considered. Once the choice is made, tradition and cultural preferences play a major role in continuing the use of animals. However, as conditions change, group must be able to adapt by changing herd composition. The size of the herd is also dependent on a number of factors, with the carrying capacity of the pastures being a primary issue. As different species of animals vary in their ease of control, susceptibility to disease or predators, or attractiveness to raider rustlers, the size of the herd may be dependent on the available labor to control and or defend them. These factors are important consideration because disease and or theft can instantly decrease the number of animals. One has reducing a rich household to poverty overnight. In addition, each pasture will have a natural limiting factor that will restrict herd size, and the number of animals cannot exceed that limit, following Liebig's law of the minimum. It may also be desirable to maintain certain sex and age ratio in the herd. In some cases, herds are culled with most young males being killed for their meat and hides and only a few being kept for breeding purposes. Most of the females are kept to reproduce and to provide milk. In addition, animal will form attachments and relationship with one another. Due to species differences in lifespan, each species require a different herd size to allow for individual animals to live together long enough to form these relationships. Finally, there are social factors in determining the size of a herd. The requirements of the family owning the herd will greatly influence its minimum size. A herd might be developed to be as large as possible even if overtaxing the pastures in the short term, so that it can be split into two herds. Such a split of the herd may also be done to allow the human social unit to also split. The number and the types of animals are also status markers. A person might choose to maintain a herd of cattle for status reason even if those animals were ill suited to the pasture type. For example, in Mongolia, wealthy families kept larger stock and tended towards sheep, while poorer families had smaller animals and tended towards goats. All families tried to keep as many horses as possible even if unneeded or uneconomic. Let us understand the movement of herds. No natural pasture can support herd animals all year, and pastoralists must generally move their animals to different pastures depending on the season. The movement of animals from pasture to pasture may be based on a number of factors. If a pasture is exhausted, the animal will have to be moved to a new one. In many cases, pastures in the mountains are used in the summer and the animals move to the pasture at lower elevation in the summer. Movements might also be based on the rainfall, with animals being moved from drier to the wetter pastures. A seasonal migration might also be undertaken to maintain the political autonomy, to avoid disease or pest, or to exploit other resources. Most pastoral groups are mobile and practice a seasonal round. Figure 2 and 3 within a well-defined territory called the tethered nomadism. Figure 2 depicts a very simple seasonal round with respect to the movement of pastoral groups, whereas figure 3 depicts a fairly complex seasonal round with respect to movement of pastoral groups. However, all movements are flexible to some extent as conditions change, and people must be able to adapt to them. In some cases, only a segment of the population, such as the herders, move with their animals in a seasonal transhumane system. The movement of people and animals to different pastures require careful planning that incorporates information on pasture conditions. Such trips range from as few as 10 miles to as many as 1000 miles. Among the most important decisions made are where to move, when to move, and how long to stay. A decision string similar to that made in patch choice models. In some cases, such as in Central Asia, the winters are such that there is nowhere to move the animals. In those cases, fodder is gathered and stored to feed the animals during the winter. Pastoralists must be able to judge the quality of water and pastures before the animals are moved, because one does not want to invest the time and energy to move a herd to a place that cannot support them. Thus, like hunter-gatherers, it is important to monitor the pasture areas so that sufficient information can be available when decision on when and where to move the animals are made. Let us see the pastoral products. The primary resource derived directly from the animals are meat, blood, milk, hides, hair, wool and dung. The major secondary uses of animals are for transportation of humans and goods and for labor such as pulling plough. Animal provides a number of food used by people. Meat is a major animal product, but obtaining it results in the death of the animal, a one-time use. If meat were the major goal, it would be most efficient to butcher most of the males for their meat and hides, keeping a few for breeding purposes and retaining the females for reproduction and milk production. As the females died, naturally their meat and the hides would then be utilized. This is the approach taken in the cattle industry in Western countries. A more efficient use of the animals and their product is to utilize them without killing them, ultimately getting more food value from each animal. One example of this approach is the production of the milk as the major product, called milch pastoralism. Milk is obtained from female and is consumed or made into butter, cream or cheese. If the product goal is just milk, female and only a few males are needed, as in the contemporary dairy industry. Blood is another major product that can be obtained without killing the animal. About a quarter of blood can be taken from a cow of either sex about once a month without damaging the health. If females are being milked, the blood extraction might be primarily from males. The blood can be consumed alone or can be mixed with milk for consumption. Thus, some pastoral groups will not butcher healthy animals but milk and bleed them using those products along with meat from the aged animals as their main foods. In East African pastoral groups, the primary component to the human diet is milk with meat second and blood third. Like meat, the procurement of skin or hides require that the animals be killed. Hides can be used for a large number of products including covers for shelter, clothing, shoes and a variety of other leather products. Hair and wool can also be made into many products, but unlike hides, hair and wool can be removed from the animals and so are renewable resources. Dung can be a major animal product. Dung can be used as a fuel in the construction of the houses, walls or the other structures, or for a number of other purposes. Dung also serve as a fertilizer and help to maintain the productivity of the pastures. In addition, dung can be traded to farmers for use in their fields. In some cases, farmer will arrange for pastoralist animal to be grazed in their fallow field so that they can be fertilized. Now let us understand the environmental manipulations and resource management. Large scale environmental manipulations is very common in pastoral groups, primarily through the action of burning to create pasture and of grazing to maintain it. Without active grazing, much of the pasture would revert to woodlands or forest. Most pastoral groups, particularly the more mobile groups, generally invest their labor in their animals rather than invest time and efforts into capital improvement. However, water and pasture are real critical resources and both are managed and manipulated to some degree. A frequent project is the construction and maintenance of the water sources, some of which can be quite elaborate. A less common manipulation is pasture modification and improvement. However, the investment of time and material in pasture tend to be groups to a piece of land and decrease mobility. For more sedentary groups, such capital improvement are more common, with water sources, pastures, agricultural field and settlement receiving more investment. Let us understand the intensive resource management. Specifically of animals, it is a hallmark of pastoralist. Most group will utilize natural landscape for pastures and so will invest relatively little time in environmental manipulations, preferring instead to invest their labor in increasing the number of animals and or their products. Controlling animals, their movement, the kinds and amount of the food eaten and timing and circumstances of the death are important management goals. Exercising control of breeding is also a major management goal. One can prevent certain animals from reproducing by killing them before they can breed, castrating the males or keeping the various animals isolated from the potential mates. The purpose of the controlled breeding is to maximize desired trait and to minimize or eliminate undesired characteristics. Desired trait might include increased production of the product such as milk or hair or an ability to flourish in poor quality pasture. Now let us see the relation with the other groups. Pastoralists often occupy and or utilize at least two ecozones, one where they live for most of the time and another where they pasture their animals. Usually pastures are located at some distance from the main habitation area and the regions between the pastures are occupied by other people. Whether hunter-gatherer, other pastoralist or agriculturist, the latter being the most common. To move their animals, pastoralists must often traverse the territory of these other groups and so must maintain good relationship with them. During those occasions, product will likely be traded between the two groups. If the second group are farmers, the pastoralist may graze their animals in the fallow field so that the dung can be used as a source of fertilizer. Pastoralists may also share some ecozones with other groups, particularly farmers, rather than just traverse them. This sharing is sometimes done on a seasonal basis, with each group being in the area at different times with no conflict. In some cases, the pastoralist will live intermingled with the farmers, grazing their animals in the fallow fields, along roads or wherever they can until it is time to move to new pastures. One could argue that the two groups occupy different niche within the same habitat. However, Bates argued that the pattern of shared land use should be viewed as a function of the balance of power rather than of ecology. Now, let us summarize the module. We have understood that pastoralism is the form of agriculture in which domestic animals are emphasized, sometimes to the exclusion of other resources. In pastoralism, human and animals have formed a long-term mutualistic relationship where animals are guaranteed reproduction and protection and humans get food and other products. Many pastoral groups maintain a loose tribal organization, but the household is generally the primary organization. Three major types of pastoralism can be defined. Number one, the nomadic, where groups are very mobile and depend almost entirely on their animals. Number two, semi-nomadic, where the groups are less mobile and animal products are supplemented by horticulture. And number three, semi-sedentary, where the groups are not very mobile and horticulture form a major component of the economy. Two other forms, herdsman husbandry and sedentary animal husbandry, are pastoral component of the large agricultural system. Pastoralists specializing in one species occupy four broad regions of the Old World, including Northern Eurasia, the Eastern Mediterranean, the Arabian Peninsula and Sub-Saharan Africa. Pastoralists working multiple stock occupy the broad arid region extending from North Africa east across Southwest Asia and to Mongolia. All of these groups are under pressure to abandon pastoralism and take up farming. The primary component of any pastoral system include use and maintenance of pasture, the types of animal grazers or browsers, herded, composition and size of herds and the movement of the herds. To be successful, pastoralism must make good long-term decision in all these areas. Pastoral products include meat, blood, milk, hides, hair, wool and dung. In addition, most groups supplement these material with other domesticated products, either grown or obtained by trade. Wild resources are also widely used. Grazing properly managed does little damage to ecosystem, and some, such as the plains of North America, developed concurrently with grazing animals. However, poor planning, bad decision or other factors can result in overgrazing that can alter the ecosystem until they are virtually destroyed. The modern practice of turning diverse forest ecosystem into pasture is causing considerable damage. Thank you.